Hi, Spero Day. My name is Jenna, and we are so glad that you are joining us today. When I first came to Spero Day, I honestly didn't know what to expect. I came in with a lot of wounds, a lot of hurt, and a lot of baggage from many years leading in other churches. And when I first walked through these doors, I was scared. I just didn't know if I could continue going to church anymore. But something on that first Sunday stuck. And I don't know that I could articulate it, but something kept bringing me back. And as my husband and I kept coming back, we started to feel a real, genuine love and support in this building. We started to feel like we had a home and that we could belong here just as we were. I didn't feel like I had to believe the same things as the person next to me. I didn't feel like I had to put a mask on. I didn't feel like I had to be anything other than who I am. And that to me is special, and I know it's not found everywhere. What I wish for you is that as you join with us here at Spero Day, that you would feel a sense of belonging, a place where you could feel safe just as you are, a place that you didn't feel judged for whether you believe the right or the wrong thing, but that you could just exist, that you could find healing here.
Well, let me show you a peculiar scene from the life of Jesus, from the Gospel of Mark. And let me set this up for you. Here, Jesus is taking a break from hours of engagement and debate from an array of people whose agenda is to trap him in his own words, yet he still engages, he fields questions, he still debates theology, which is a very Jewish rabbi thing to do. However, he artfully escapes their doctrinal traps and he turns their questions back on them. He even dazzles the crowd and even his own disciples with his wit. He could be quite funny, his authenticity, his truth-telling, and he calls out those who are burdening the people with this rigid religious system. This still goes on today. And so then Jesus goes and rests. He sits down across from the temple treasury, and here are the words from Mark 12. Jesus sat across from the collection box for the temple treasury, and he observed how the crowd gave their donations. Many of the rich people were throwing in lots of money. But one poor widow came forward and put in 2 small copper coins worth a penny. Jesus called his disciples to him and he said, "I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than anyone and everyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them are giving out of their spare change, but she from hopeless poverty has given everything she had and even what she needed to live on." So what is this desperate need that all of us have? It's the need to be seen. It's the need to be acknowledged. It's the need to be appreciated for who we are and who we aren't. So Jesus doesn't just plop himself down across from the temple treasury to merely people watch and then judge them. He focuses his attention on what was actually going on between the lines. Jesus notices something. He sees a woman who was apparently invisible to everyone else around her, a woman who was invisible to the people of privilege and comfort, who were just tossing in their spare money in these tall jars that held the offering. invisible to the crowds who had just listened to and delighted in Jesus' teachings about love and compassion. And even his own disciples who had wandered off, Jesus has to call them over and go, look and see. Are you seeing this? Do you see what I see? Are you seeing her? And one of the things that is so evident about Jesus Christ was he just saw everyone. He always validated the people around him. He could be in the middle of something else, and he would notice somebody. If that was you, he would see you. When the blind man called out to Jesus and his own disciples are going, okay, let's move it along, old man. He doesn't really have time. Jesus then stops, sees the man, and actually turns to the guy and goes, what is it that you want me to do for you? When Jesus runs into a very concerned father who's concerned about his daughter, so sick, and asks Jesus, come to my house and pray for her. As Jesus is rushing off, this woman stops him, and Jesus stops. He listens, he looks at her, and he touches her, and he heals her. There's this one time Jesus is so busy with a full day of ministry, and he ends up at Peter's house, and Peter's mother is sick. He sees her. She then gets up and cooks for everybody, and suddenly there's these knocks at the door, and Jesus spends hours into the wee hours of the morning just seeing people and attending to them and healing them. Jesus always sees. So as I've been saying, Christ always sees what others don't. I love what Reverend Christy Dalton points out in her essay about this Mark 12 passage. And she says, it's no accident that Jesus saw the widow and made her visible to those who were ignoring her. And Dalton points out that sprinkled all throughout the scriptures, there are just scores of references to widows. And in many of the verses, the scriptures are commanding the people to care for the widows because it's God's way, and also to initiate justice and compassion on behalf of the widows. And Dalton, in her essay, she reminds us that women in that culture who had lost their spouse held a special place in God's heart, because becoming a widow made her more vulnerable in that culture. Now, typically when this passage comes up, spiritual appreciators are taught that this woman is an outstanding model of sacrificial financial giving, and she certainly is. But Jesus doesn't then manipulate a generosity sermon in any way, but rather Jesus sees the woman and he comments on her participation in a society that has turned its eyes away from her plight. A group of religious people, though they have a belief, they still fail to see her life, her troubles. And listen, can we all be honest with ourselves here? It's not always easy or comfortable to see with loving spiritual eyes, is it? Because when we really open our eyes and we really see the needs of people, see the needs of the church, we come face to face with our own complicity in systems that just tend to maintain our comfort, while there exists a system that might be keeping widows, orphans, strangers, marginalized people, keeping them aside and not seeing them. I mean, right? We don't like to see the homeless on city sidewalks as we walk to a Tennessee Titans game or some sort of musical show. It's not comfortable to see the children who live in group homes because they were removed from a violent family, and now some even consider them unadoptable, right? We can be blind to the non-unionized immigrants around us. But if our lawns are getting mowed, if the drive-through is being serviced, if the fruit we want is getting picked, it's easier not to see. So, what does it mean to actually be seen? I think much of spirituality is about seeing. It's about being awakened and seeing with that figurative third eye. As I said, feeling seen, feeling heard, it's one of our deepest needs. We want our lives, we want our hurts, we want our stresses and anxieties to be seen, because it validates a real experience we're having. And when we're not seen, we just feel dismissed, or that our experience might be being gaslit in some way. When we're angry about something, being seen means, as Alan Dubottom says, it means that someone says, it must feel very chaotic for you and inside you right now. When we're sad, being seen means that someone acknowledges that and goes, listen, I know you're feeling that. Everything that Christ projected when he was among the people just presented that he sees them. It's like he's saying, I know it's been too much for you. I recognize that. And I'm there for you. This is what the people would feel. Now, what's crazy is this sounds so simple, doesn't it? To be seen by somebody or to see. Simple, right? So what does it mean to be seen by someone? Well, it means to acknowledge somebody's emotions, somebody's thoughts, somebody's experiences. It means to be attentive to them in ways that show empathy for what they're going through, compassion for the situation they're in. And by the way, if you're wondering if seeing somebody is a spiritual quality that we find in Christian spirituality, and do we find it in the scriptures? I would say it's unequivocally yes. Ultimately, what I'm sharing, being seen is modeled everywhere by Jesus's actions and his treatment of people. But when you find the word gentleness, specifically in the New Testament, this is an acknowledgement of being seen. Now, I want to say something to those of you who are parents, because this whole thing is very important for our kids. If you're not a parent, do not dismiss this, because you're probably the child of a parent. Now, for some of you parents, not being seen and having your feelings properly acknowledged, for a lot of this began in our own childhood. This is why, if you're a parent, I hope what I'm sharing is somewhat helpful. So for us parents, and even the most loving ones, it's our lack of awareness here that could lead us to missing this in our own kids. And it's not that we don't care intensely for our kids, right? We do. And it's not that we don't love them. It might be that we're unaware or we're missing something, and we're not able to reflect back our child's emotions and moods. And when we don't do that, it can tend to dismiss them. I'm just so grateful for my wife, Liz, here, because she is the one that really brought this value of our kids being seen to our home. And we then ended up having our home orbit that value. Scholar Alan Dubottom, in his School of Life, he points out how parents can easily mishear, and he presents these typical scenarios of when a child goes unacknowledged and feels like they're not being seen. So the child might express, I'm feeling sad. And then the parent says, don't be silly. You can't be sad. We're on a beach vacation. Or a child expresses, I'm really worried about this particular thing. And the parent then says, sweetheart, now that's ridiculous. There's nothing to be worried about. There's nothing to be scared about here. Or the child wakes up on a Monday morning and just goes, I wish there wasn't any school ever. And the parent retorts back, don't be silly, get your stuff because we have to leave the house by 7:30. So, right, these responses, you might go, well, those seem pretty normal, no big whoop. But how different it might go if we as parents create safety and allow our children to be able to express their emotions, and what may be different sorts of adults they will grow into, being able to process their own emotions if there would just be a few tweaks of what we say to our children. If, for example, as Dubottom talks about, you could just say, it's weird, isn't it? How we can be sad even in weird moments when we're on a beach vacation. Or, I can really understand the anxiety and how scared you are. Or it might be, listen, it really is horrible having 2 tests on a Monday when you've just had a wonderful weekend. Now, I want to say something to couples and partners and those of you in love relationships and marriages. And the idea of being seen, it's not just something from our childhood. We as adults, we can experience this too. And especially people in love and intimate and attached to somebody, they often express, I don't really feel seen in this relationship. So again, Dubottom points out these scenarios. A partner may say, express, sometimes I just feel like you don't listen. And then the other partner goes defensively, that's silly. I put a lot of work into this relationship. Or a partner expresses a fear, things at work are getting tough. And I feel I might be tired or fired. And the partner responds back, nonsense, that's not possible. You work so hard there. Now, back to Jesus for a moment, and why maybe the religious leaders and the rich people missed seeing the woman that day. It certainly could have been because of their lack of awareness or their own pride or prejudice. Very true. But it's also conceivable that it was their fear. For them to see this woman, it might mean they have to acknowledge that it's inconvenient for them to see her, or it might call out their compassion and their lack of ability to give comfort. Now back to our kids. Maybe one of the reasons that we don't see our kids or acknowledge their emotions because it triggers an emotional fear in us. When our kids are hurting, that hurts. When our kids are troubled, we're troubled. And so at times it's hard to take on their hurt. I know it is for me. So we can tend to shut down their emotions because we are afraid of our own. And then maybe some of it is the tutelage we got in our own background, our own growing up, right? Maybe it wasn't modeled to us to acknowledge difficult emotions. And maybe, or we think, if I allow this difficult emotion, it's just going to get crazy here. Or if I validate this emotion, maybe I'll turn my kids into timid and weak kids. But we know from studies that when people are able to air their troubles, their feelings, their emotions, it actually creates resilient people. When the angry person can air appropriately what they're feeling, it diminishes the anger. And when we start to moralize and correct or dismiss, this just creates more internal rebellion in people maybe, or it certainly adds to somebody not feeling seen. The good news here is what Jesus modeled, and there can be an enormous transformation that's at hand for all of us right now. So do you know what Jesus did? He saw her. He acknowledged her. He validated her situation. And just peruse the Gospels yourself and see what Jesus does time and time again. Check it out for yourself. Now back to us. When you and I pause our typical reactions and then respond with awareness, or we listen and then play somebody's feelings back to them, people feel seen. People feel cared for. People then feel safe. What we need to do is play their feelings and emotions back to them. And there are some wonderful phrases that do that. Like when we say, gosh, I really hear you. Is this what I'm hearing? Gosh, I think I'm really understanding. Is this what it is? You know what this is called? This is called non-judgmental mirroring. And when you and I can get emotionally focused, emotionally aware, mirroring back to somebody their feelings and emotions, it just allows them to be seen, and it changes everything. It did it for Liz and I. It did it for our kids. So let's begin to do a little stillness and contemplation now as we close in prayer. Just still your body and your heart, your mind. Just be quiet for a moment. Breathe in deeply. Breathe out slowly. And just be still. And just begin to attune your heart spiritually to God. Be very present. God, may you awaken our eyesight. Oh, we see and observe all the time as we walk around our lives in this world. But help us to stop and to pause and to look at people, especially the immediate people in our lives, our partners, our spouses, those we are in love with, our friends, our children, to the needs of people around us. Help us to see them. And God, I pray for anybody out there that just doesn't feel seen. I pray that you would send people into their life who will see them. And I pray through their own contemplation and reflection, they would not see faith as something merely to believe in with their mind, but their faith would be an experience that as their heart opens up, they would feel seen with empathy and compassion towards them by you. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.